Welcome back everybody, my name is Tucker and today I'm bringing you guys a video that took me an extremely long time to make, but ended up turning out really well and gave me some really cool and unexpected outcomes. I had this idea to use NBA 2K19 to simulate through this upcoming NBA season 25 different times and record what happened. I made a whole spreadsheet, as you can see, that allowed me to record anything from Finals MVP to who won Rookie of the Year to which teams made the playoffs and how many times to All-NBA teams and everything in between. And in this video, I'm going to share with you guys everything that I found. A few notes really quick. I left everything 100% default in my league. I didn't touch any of the sliders, and I left injuries on because they're as much a part of the season as anything else. Also, I did have control over one of the teams, but I set everything to be automatic, even trades, so I had nothing to do with any of the outcomes. All right, with that out of the way, let's go ahead and get started. Starting off, we have the All-Star selections. Now, it's important to note that if a player is seriously injured at the time of the All-Star game, 2K won't select them as an All-Star. There is no such thing as a guy being picked and then being replaced by an injury alternate as there is in real life. So if a few of these numbers are lower than you thought they would be, then that is probably why. In the Western Conference, there were 20 different players that made an All-Star team, and LeBron and Kevin Durant were the only two guys to make it to all 25 teams. After that, there's a pretty solid group around 19 or 20 before dropping off to guys like Chris Paul, Jimmy Butler, and others. In terms of outliers near the bottom, we have Draymond Green, Rudy Gobert, CJ McCollum, and DeMar DeRozan. In the Eastern Conference, there were 24 different guys that made an All-Star team, so obviously there's a lot more variance here. Kyrie Irving, John Wall, Giannis Antetokounmpo, and Kawhi Leonard were the only guys to make it to more than 20 games. As you can see, in the East, there's less of a drop-off and more of a steady distribution across more players. In terms of outliers, there's Chris Dunn, Nikola Vucevic, and Aaron Gordon all the way down there at the bottom. Across the entire league, there were 44 unique players that made an All-Star team, and the Mavs, Clippers, Kings, and Hawks are the only teams without a single All-Star across all 25 simulations. Moving on now to the stats leaders and beginning with points. Steph Curry led the league in scoring 14 times, Russell Westbrook led it 8 times, and Damian Lillard 3, which means an Eastern Conference player never led the league in scoring in any of the 25 sims. In terms of assists, Chris Paul and Lonzo Ball were the only two players to lead the league in assists at 21 and 4 respectively. And once again, you won't find an Eastern Conference player here. Moving along now to rebounding, Andre Drummond was the clear leader here, leading the league in rebounding 20 times, with Hassan Whiteside sitting at 4, and the only Western Conference player to lead the league in this category was Karl Anthony Towns, and he only did it once. Next up, we have the season awards, and we begin with the Rookie of the Year. This one was a very clear favorite. Luka Doncic won it 23 times, and DeAndre Ayton only won it twice. I specifically remember as I was going through this, that Doncic won like the first 15 times, then Ayton won it back-to-back times, and then Doncic the rest of the way. This was another category dominated by the West, as there was not a single Eastern Conference Rookie of the Year. Coach of the Year, no surprise, Steve Kerr won it the most at 14, followed by Nick Nurse of the Raptors at 9, and Billy Donovan actually got it twice. Moving on now to the most improved player, this was essentially the Sacramento Kings a lot. De'Aaron Fox won it 13 times, Buddy Hield won it 10 times, and Ricky Rubio was the only non-King player to win this award at 2 times. Defensive Player of the Year, this was dominated by Giannis Antetokounmpo. He won it 18 times, Kawhi only 4, Anthony Davis twice, and Draymond Green once. Last up now, we have the league MVP, and no surprise, it was dominated by the Golden State Warriors. As you can see, there were only 4 different winners of this award, with Steph Curry leading the way, followed by Russell Westbrook, DeMarcus Cousins, and Giannis Antetokounmpo. Cousins is an interesting case because for some reason a handful of times he just randomly got a lot more touches and scored a ton of points, and that brought down Steph Curry's scoring average, which allowed him to win the MVP. Next up, we have the All-NBA selections. Across the league, there were 27 different players that were named to an All-NBA team at least once, and 15 of them came in the West. LeBron and James Harden were the only 2 players to be named to all 25 teams, but there were a lot of guys in the West over 10. In terms of outliers, there's Marc Gasol and Kevin Durant, because for some reason, Kevin Durant just could not make an All-NBA team in most seasons over the other wings and forwards, despite being an All-Star in every single simulation. And the only teams in the West without an All-NBA selection were the Mavs, Kings, Spurs, Jazz, and Clippers. Moving on now to the Eastern Conference, there were 12 different players that made an All-NBA team. As you can see, there's a pretty sharp contrast between the two conferences, as Kawhi and Giannis were the only 2 guys in the East to make it over 20 times. And there just weren't nearly as many overall selections as there were in the West. In terms of outliers, there's Victor Oladipo, Joel Embiid, Hassan Whiteside, and once again, I don't know why, but Kyrie Irving. Just like on the other side of the league, there were 5 teams that did not get a single All-NBA selection, and those were the Hawks, Magic, Hornets, Bulls, and Cavs. Moving on now, we have one of the more interesting categories, and that is the teams that made the playoffs. Overall, 29 different teams made the playoffs at least once, which means there's only one that didn't make it in any of the simulations, and I'll share that with you at the end. In the West, the only 3 teams to make the playoffs every single time were the Warriors, Rockets, and Thunder. The Warriors had the best record in the conference 22 times, and the Thunder 3 times. Other than those 3 teams that I mentioned first, the Lakers, Timberwolves, Jazz, and Nuggets made the playoffs the most. And then there's a bit of a drop-off behind them to the rest of the conference. In terms of surprises, the Phoenix Suns made the playoffs 9 different times, while the Trailblazers only made it 5 times. And with the outliers at the bottom, we have the Kings, Grizzlies, and Clippers all making it once. In the East now, the only 2 teams to make the playoffs every single year were the Raptors and the Celtics. The Toronto Raptors had the best record in the East an incredible 24 times, and it wasn't even the Celtics that were the outlier. It was in fact the Milwaukee Bucks that one time had the best record in the East. Outside of the Raptors and Celtics, we have the Sixers, Pacers, Bucks, Wizards, Heat, and Hawks as the teams that made the playoffs the most. Which leads us to the surprises being that the Hawks made it to the playoffs 15 times, and the Bulls made it 11 times. And there really was only one outlier here, and that's the Orlando Magic, were the only team in the East to make the playoffs just once. And if you've been paying attention, you can probably tell that the only team out of all 25 simulations to not make the playoffs across the entire league were the New York Knicks. Last step now, we're going to be taking a look at the Eastern Conference, Western Conference, and NBA Finals matchups, as well as the Finals MVPs. In the Eastern Conference Finals, the most common matchup was the Raptors and the Celtics 13 times, and then there were some pretty weird ones like the Raptors and the Hawks 4 times, the Celtics and Wizards once, and even the Celtics and Bulls 1 time. Overall, the Raptors made it there the most at 23 times, and the Celtics with 15. In the Western Conference Finals, the Warriors and Rockets, as well as the Warriors and Thunder, were equally likely at 8 times each. But there were also plenty of weird ones in the West, including the Thunder and Timberwolves once, the Warriors and Nuggets twice, and the Thunder and Suns once. Overall, the Warriors made it 20 times, the Thunder 13 times, and the Rockets 10 times. And now for the NBA Finals, the most common matchup was the Warriors and Raptors 14 times, followed by the Raptors and Thunder 6 times. There were 2 very weird ones, being the Raptors and Wolves facing each other in the finals once, and then the Warriors and Hawks facing each other. Overall, Golden State made it to the finals 17 times, and the Raptors made it an incredible 21 times. In terms of the NBA champion, there were actually 4 different teams that won it all. In a shocking outcome, the Raptors were actually the most likely NBA champion with 12 times, followed closely by the Warriors 11 times. And then the last 2 were the Celtics 1 time, and somehow the Minnesota Timberwolves won the NBA championship once, and if you've been following the videos on the channel, that definitely irritates me. In terms of finals MVPs, as you can see on screen, it's Kawhi Leonard with 11, Steph Curry with 7, DeMarcus Cousins with 4, and then Kyrie Irving, Kyle Lowry, and Karl Anthony Towns each with 1. And there you have it, the sum total of 25 different simulations of this coming NBA season in NBA 2K19. Now, obviously, I understand that this is not really what 2K is supposed to be used for. It's not a prediction tool, but it is still interesting to me to do these kinds of things and then at the end of the year, see where these kinds of predictions landed. There actually ended up being a lot more variance in the outcomes than I expected. For example, I thought the Warriors would win 19 or 20 championships, and it was actually the Raptors that ended up winning the most. Not only that, but teams like the Hawks and Bulls made the conference finals in the East, but LeBron never made it in the West with the Lakers. And then there were those crazy playoff outcomes where teams like the Kings and Nets and Cavs were making the playoffs, and the Knicks just couldn't get in even once. And also just the sheer dominance of the Raptors in the East. The only time they didn't finish as the number 1 seed in the conference, Kawhi Leonard tore his ACL at the All-Star break, and then the Bucks took the number 1 seed. And even though the Celtics were fairly consistent, finishing between the 2 and 4 seed most seasons, it was still strange to me that they never once had the best record in the East. So even though I've done more than my fair share of complaining about the Sims in 2K19 this year, all of that unpredictability kind of made this a lot more fun than I thought it would be at first. This took me a ton of time, as I probably spent 6 or 7 hours just trying to get all the data together before I even started producing the video, but it turned out really well. If you guys have any other questions about the data, be sure to leave them down in the comment section below, because there were a few interesting tidbits that I couldn't even include in the full video. But with all that said, once again, my name is Tucker. If you missed any of my previous videos, be sure to check out the boxes on screen. Thank you all so much for watching, and I'll see you all next time.